Forged by the Apocalypse, Chapter 9, Hubris. As part of my ongoing effort to keep myself alive, I stopped ignoring a glaring piece of information on my character page. I had, of course, noticed my ostentatiously named title, but accepting its presence was to accept the truth. Mrs. Nabel had been a dragon, and I had killed her. The tiny, doddering old woman I had passed 100 times in the street, waved at and mostly ignored, was a system-confirmed dragon. And dead. Title: Dragon Slayer. Some lives weigh more than others, and few existences rival the dragon. You're one of the exceptions. Effect: increased resistance against draconic attacks. Improved effectiveness against draconic enemies. While the wordage was very impressive, the effect wasn't too helpful. I'd probably think differently if I ran into another dragon, but I doubted some small increase would help me survive that situation. I sighed. I was overflowing with power right now, so it wasn't like I needed more advantages. A rumble from my core reminded me that I did, actually. I needed every advantage I could grasp with my grubby hands to survive the dungeon, let alone the world beyond it. As dangerous and frightening as my situation may be, I could also see it for the opportunity that it was. It had been just over a day and a half since I awoke in the dungeon, so 2 days trying to understand the system at most for the world at large. In such a short time, I had become a completely different person, and I was only just scratching the surface of what was possible. Even without further levels, there were still 3 aspect slots for me to fill. So, we were hunting. Well, I was hunting, and Naya was doing her best impression of a bull in a china shop. "What's this thing?" she called, causing me to roll my eyes, drop my character page, and wander over. We had found all sorts of things in the sand as we walked further into the dungeon. For the most part, we were keeping to the perimeter, but the shiny things had brought us deeper and deeper. "That appears to be a glasses case," I patiently explained. "Humans without perfect eyesight can get special glass made for them, so keeping them safe is important." Naya frowned, but I anticipated her question. "No magic before the shift, remember?" "Ah, that's right." Immediately losing interest, Naya dropped the case and flitted away to scan for more oddities. She hadn't found anything useful or valuable in her search, but it had passed the time while looking for another scorpion dune. The actual sand dunes were everywhere, but the enemies were less common. Out of the 10 or so we had passed, only 2 of the sandy structures contained the weird insects. I'd inspected the body of one of them before letting Naya dispose of them all, and was fairly sure they couldn't survive in the old world. I saw no mouth on them at all. It seemed instead of stingers or pincers, the scorpions instead had a tail which ended in a funnel, and a pair of short hooks which could bury into the sand. The Labrador-sized scorpions were bulbous, but as I suspected from afar, their physiology didn't make sense when it came to firing the balls. The attack was magical in nature, and so was their feeding cycle, most likely. The battles had been nearly identical to the first, and with even less efficiencies. I practiced on the final group, deflecting the high-speed projectiles from 3 level 6 scorpions for 5 minutes. By the end, I was able to accurately hit the ball straight back at the shooter, which was how the last 3 had perished. I was happy with my progress, but not as happy as Naya. "Level 10? Amidst her happy groaning over the dead scorpion bodies, I heard her glee and turned to see her shimmer with a silver light for a moment before it faded. I was edging closer to level 20 myself, but I could tell the scorpions were giving less with each kill. They just weren't strong enough for me. Not true for the fairy. Naya hit the earlier benchmark with glee. "I'm the first." "The first?" I asked. She zipped through the air with more speed than I'd ever seen her exhibit before. Definitely upgraded. Before I could stop her, a miniature wasp woman kissed the bridge of my nose. She smelled of scorpion, and I swiped her away with an exasperated chuckle. "First what?" "The first fairy to reach level 10. Oh, you're a good one, you are. Can you see how strong my wings are?" To prove her point, Naya shot off in a single direction until she was just a pinprick in even my impressive vision. Another few seconds later, and she cannoned past me, flicking my ear. I swore loudly and reached up, finding blood. She tried again, but I was ready this time. A mana-charged puff of breath knocked her out of the air and into the sand. Aspect of the dragon, remember? The exhale was hardly an attack, definitely not dragon breath, but it amused me to imagine it all the same. Maybe one day they would be. Naya wasn't upset, jumping back into the air with a front flip. That's fair, she begrudged with a nod. What happens if you're the first to level 10? Is it a dungeon fairy thing? Yes and no, Naya answered, a desperate fire in her eyes. If I'm the first level 10 fairy, then you could get some achievements too. Well, I knew that word, but I didn't want to get carried away. What achievements are there? Did other people know about them already? Were they actively going for prizes that were meant to be mine? A surprising burst of anger and jealousy flared within me at the idea, and I smiled as I let it dissipate. I didn't own the changes to this new world. Tons, I bet. I don't really know. I only found out about them when I got one. Ah, so Naya received the information from the system just like I did. That was interesting, if nothing else. Naya was happy to discuss more, but ultimately the conversation was unhelpful. I felt a bit of pressure hanging above my head, which wasn't there before, even as I told myself it didn't matter. The system's changes to my body, along with the various bouts of unconsciousness I had suffered in the last 48 hours, kept me mostly fueled, but I was starting to feel tired. The idea of resting while there was potentially one-time gains for the taking was torture, however. Let's go find some scorpions, I told Naya. The nest I had found was different from the dunes I had destroyed earlier. 6 sandy spires rose high into the air, higher than any tree I had ever seen. Redwoods in America or something like this, I thought. I hoped they were still there. I pushed down my anger at the damage to the world I hadn't even got to explore yet, and approached the closest tower of sand. Once I was in range, a blanket of footballs rained down on me at once. Taking more than a fancy spin of my staff, I judged the flight of the incoming shots well enough to slip through the onslaught and close in on the first huge dune. Dozens of names appeared as I got closer, scorpions from levels 1 to 9. The other huge dunes would hold the same amount, no doubt, and the thought was slightly worrying. Of course, this fight wasn't to be the simple back and forth I was used to with the scorpions thus far. It was my fault for assuming. Of course I would accidentally find the boss, and of course it would have a stupid name. I should have been mad at the system for yet another joke at the expense of my ruined world, but this time I just felt I should have expected it. Everything started well. The staggering amount of attacks from within the tall pile of sand was manageable, to the point that I began hitting back at the scorpions. Amongst my dodging and deflections, a few of the projectiles found their way back into the sand. My precision was increasing with each return. Right as I was beginning to feel confident, the ground beneath me shifted, literally. At once, the huge sand dune tumbled, all structure lost. I was nearly trapped in the sand fall before I was lifted from below. I was hit with the full force of a bus as a massive leg hauled itself from the ground. Any pretense of control I thought I had went out the window, and I was thrown helplessly through the air. Naya caught up with me, but she couldn't help. It almost felt like she was taunting me. The ground was coming fast, and the only thoughts running through my head were how much this was going to hurt, and how much I wished I had wings. It was during my unplanned and failed journey to the stars that I saw the name of the huge beast hidden under the sand. Even screaming for my life, I couldn't stop the roll of my eyes. Boss monster, manager scorpion, level 40. That doesn't even make sense. How is it a manager? Distracted by the name, I plummeted into the sand like a stone. Immediately, I knew the damage was too great. My legs spasmed in the sand and I couldn't feel them, nor could I control them. My bladder leaked. Pain threatened to send me unconscious, but embarrassment and fury kept me going. Agonizing sparks jumped through my back as I opened my character page and added a point to fortitude. The sparks turned into lightning bolts as my spine knitted itself back together in seconds. The surge of healing energies which rushed through me quickly faded. The recovery speed was honestly jarring, but it wasn't my only issue. Shaking off the effects of pain itself wasn't simple. My body was hesitant to move, even though it was technically fine physically. My mana reserves were at half and dropping, without even an attack thrown. As disorientating as being launched into the air had been, it was impossible to lose sight of the gigantic scorpion still shaking sand from itself. I was in awe of its size, another prime example of something which could only exist in the world due to the magic now flowing straight through it. "Run!" An arrow shot past me, shouting a warning, but the sound was so shifted by the speed that it took me a few seconds to understand what had happened. I realized the arrow was Nea. At the same time I felt the ground rumble, which was in turn a second before the shadow appeared. I planted my staff in the ground and threw myself after Nea. The rumbling increased, and the shadow loomed larger. Death from above and below. I chanced the spin as I bounded forward, not slowing down with a look over my shoulder. There was an absolute stampede of scorpions behind me. Or would it be a squad? Either way, it was terrifying, but only the third scariest thing in my line of sight. Second scariest was the colossal orb burning through the air towards me. Like an artillery cannon, the gargantuan scorpion boss had planted itself to fire an actual boat-sized ball of poisonous death right at me. The most horrifying, of course, was the boss monster itself. I couldn't stop marveling at it, despite the overwhelming danger. The 6 pillars I had seen stretched high and like ancient trees were actually its impossibly long legs. Now those legs were planted to give the scorpion stability. It had become a fortress. To help set itself apart, the boss variant scorpion also waved a huge pair of pincers at me menacingly. Wonderful, I thought while fleeing for my life, just in case the army it controls and the meteors it shoots aren't enough. With the pace I managed, I quickly began to outrace the stampede of impending insects. With maybe 5 seconds before the ball landed, I frowned. The allure of achievements rang in my ear. Am I really just going to run away? Hesitation was quickly becoming an alien concept to my increasingly fast mind. Working out whether my insane gambit would succeed was a different matter, but I decided to take the risk. There might be a reward for the first person to run away from a dungeon boss, but I was loath to find that out. I didn't have the mana for a drawn-out fight, but that was okay. I just wanted to land one good hit. "Thank you," I bellowed, my voice amplified by the amount of mana running through my body. "For the target." Every wisp of mana I had went into the swing of a lifetime. Babe Ruth would have been proud. The staff had worked perfectly to vault me into the air, and with the distance I had gained from my initial sprint, I reached the apex of my jump at the ideal height. I started the downward arc just before I began pouring energy into the yo staff. The momentum of its fall doubled with every inch it moved. The staff collided with the ball. My skin burned immediately as boiling hot poison splashed onto me, and I found myself once again returned to the ground with a less than graceful landing awaiting me. It didn't matter, because for all the damage I had just taken, I had retaliated 100 times over. Before I crashed into the sand, I saw the ball racing straight towards the boss scorpion. I quickly placed a single attribute point from my level up into fortitude, gasping with pleasure as most of the burning poison fell away from my body and my broken bones yet again repaired themselves. Although invisible through the cloud of sand I had kicked up in my landing, I knew my return serve was a thing of perfection. I couldn't tell exactly how many of the smaller scorpions had been killed in my attack, but it was a lot. A pressure built up inside me again and again, each time releasing a second later. 4, 5, 6 times. An earth-shattering screech told me it was time to leave, regardless of my gains, and I heeded the message. I didn't look back once towards the scorpion nest as I escaped. My arms hurt so badly, I returned the yo staff to my inventory for the first time in days. Not having the weapon in hand felt strange, like I had lost a limb, but there was nothing for it. I placed points into each of my attributes, almost haphazardly, but nothing returned my stamina towards me. I ran for hours all the same. Everything hurt, down to my soul. Somehow, I found my way to the grass of the parkland. The tiniest sense of safety found its way to my heart at the sight. Too tired to form a single thought, or fight back against the encroaching darkness, I fell into the dirt. One by one, my senses died to nothing until the only thing left was the sputtering embers of my mana. Ooh, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 9 of Forged by the Apocalypse. There'll be another chapter tomorrow, and hopefully you enjoy that one too. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you tomorrow.